All right, let's dive into this. Virtual reality and mental health, huh? Seems like it's everywhere these days. And everyone's wondering, can it actually, help people who are struggling? So we've got a whole bunch of research here, studies and articles, and let me tell you, some of this stuff is pretty surprising.
Well, it's interesting you say that because for a long time, the focus was really, really narrow. Most of the early research, it was all about exposure therapy,
Yeah.
especially for things like, PTSD, anxiety disorders, that sort of thing.
Right, using VR to kind of safely expose people to their fears.
Exactly. And it's valuable for sure. But I think what we're starting to see now is that VR can be so much more than just a high-tech exposure therapy. It's being used in all sorts of ways across all these different types of therapy.
Okay, so what kind of beyond exposure therapy stuff are we talking about?
So one study I was looking at, they used VR for guided imagery, having people visualize a safe space or experience calming nature scenes. And the people who used VR, they reported way higher, positive feelings and just overall satisfaction compared to traditional methods.
So is it just the novelty? Or is there something more going on?
Researchers think it really comes down to the immersive nature of VR, right? It's not just seeing a picture on a screen. It's feeling like you're actually there, present in that environment. And that sense of presence, it seems to really boost the therapeutic benefits.
Yeah, that makes sense. It's one thing to imagine a peaceful beach, but it's another to actually, feel the sand, hear the waves, you're really there.
Exactly. And that heightened sense of realism, it seems to translate into stronger emotional responses, so the therapy is just more effective.
I bet there are some skeptics out there, though, people who think, this is just a fad or just a really expensive gimmick.
Oh, there are always skeptics. But the research is really starting to back it up. There was this one study that directly compared VR interventions to non-VR methods. And they found that VR consistently led to greater improvements in mood, and it was seen as more credible by the people participating, which is interesting. And the cool thing is they incorporated elements from different types of therapy, cognitive therapy, experiential therapy, just showing how versatile VR can be.
So it's not just about replicating what we already do. It's about opening up totally new possibilities.
Exactly. And it goes way beyond just anxiety and PTSD. Researchers are looking at VR for everything from depression, chronic pain to autism, even cognitive decline.
Wow, that's a pretty wide range. But, with all this excitement, are there any potential downsides, things we should be aware of?
Oh, for sure. There are definitely some risks to consider, cyber sickness, dizziness, even fall risks, especially for older adults. We can't just, throw everyone into a VR headset without thinking about it carefully.
So responsible implementation is key.
Absolutely. You need careful screening of participants, appropriate session lengths, having trained staff to handle any side effects. It all matters. And of course, we can't ignore the limitations, right? VR is still pretty expensive. It's not accessible to everyone.
Right. That's a really good point. So we've kind of established that, VR's potential goes way beyond exposure therapy. And it's not without its risks. But where does the research go from here? What are some of the specific applications they're looking at?
Well, there's this one study I found, and it focuses on a group that often gets overlooked when it comes to new technology. Older adults in long-term care facilities.
Yeah.
These folks, they often have physical limitations, and they're at a higher risk for depression and loneliness.
Yeah, that makes sense. So how does VR fit into that?
Well, this study was designed as a non-inferiority trial, meaning they wanted to see if VR was at least as effective as the standard care they're already getting. The idea is if VR can, match the effectiveness of the existing treatments, but maybe offer additional benefits or address needs that aren't being met, then it could be, a real game changer.
That's a really smart approach. So what kind of VR interventions were they looking at?
They were exploring something called sensory motor rehabilitation in VR, or IVR-SRB for short. Basically, it's using VR to help older adults improve their physical function and mobility. They have them doing exercises and tasks in the virtual world that can actually translate to real-world improvement.
Okay, that's cool. But how does that tie into mental health?
Well, this is where it gets really interesting. They found that IVR-SRB, it not only helped with physical function, but it also led to some pretty significant improvements in mental well-being, particularly a reduction in symptoms of depression and anxiety.
So by improving someone's mobility.
Yeah.
and their ability to, interact with the world,
Yeah.
it can actually have a positive impact on their mental state.
Exactly. It suggests this powerful link between, our physical and mental well-being. And VR seems to offer a really unique way to tap into that connection.
That makes me wonder if, even something as simple as the design of a virtual room could impact mood. Did any of the studies look at that?
Actually, yeah, there was one. They looked at whether being in a virtual room with curved contours,
Yeah.
Rounded walls and stuff, had a different effect on people's mood and cognitive function compared to a room with sharp angles.
I would think the curves would be more calming, right?
Yeah, you'd think so. But surprisingly, they didn't find any significant differences between the two. So it suggests that the relationship between architectural design and our emotional responses is way more complex than we might think.
So it's not just about simple shapes. There's a lot more going on.
Exactly. And it highlights the need for more research to really understand how to, design these virtual environments to best achieve different therapeutic goals.
This is all so fascinating. I'm already seeing how much more there is to VR than just those early applications.
Yeah.
What else did you find in your research?
Well, one of the things that really, stood out to me is just how many different types of therapy are being explored with VR. It's not just about trying to recreate talk therapy in a virtual space. It's about using the unique aspects of VR to create entirely new therapeutic experiences.
Okay, now I'm intrigued. What kind of new experiences are we talking about here?
Well, there's this whole area of research focused on something called embodied cognition. It's this idea that our physical experiences can directly influence our thoughts and emotions. And researchers are finding ways to harness that mind-body connection within VR.
So you're saying that what we do with our bodies in the virtual world can actually impact how we feel mentally.
Exactly. One study, for example, used VR to help people with depression practice, positive body language. They had participants do virtual exercises that encourage them to, stand tall, smile, make eye contact, things that convey confidence and openness.
So it's almost like tricking the brain into feeling happier just by changing your posture.
That's a good way to put it. And the amazing thing is, it seemed to work. Participants reported feeling a noticeable lift in their mood and a decrease in depressive symptoms after doing these, virtual embodied cognition exercises.
Wow, that's pretty powerful. It makes you wonder, what other creative applications are out there? Could we use VR to, help people develop more self-compassion? Or to, improve empathy and understanding in relationships?
Those are great questions, and researchers are exploring those very possibilities. I'm particularly interested in the potential of VR for social skills training. Imagine being able to practice navigating tricky social situations in a, safe, controlled virtual world.
That could be huge.
Yeah.
For people with social anxiety or, anyone who struggles with those kinds of interactions.
Absolutely. You could rehearse conversations, experiment with different ways of communicating, and build your confidence without the fear of, real world consequences. And because it's virtual, you can repeat those scenarios over and over until you feel, ready to face them in real life.
It's like having a virtual social skills coach in your pocket. Speaking of coaching, another area that seems perfect for VR is mindfulness training. I've seen all these VR apps and programs popping up that are designed to, guide you through meditations, relaxation exercises, often with immersive nature scenes and soothing sounds.
Right. And it's not just about offering a temporary escape. VR might actually make those mindfulness practices more effective. Remember how we talked about the power of immersion? Well, being fully present in a tranquil virtual environment might help people quiet their minds more easily and really focus on the present moment. So VR gives mindfulness a boost. Potentially, yeah. There's some early research suggesting that people who practice mindfulness meditation in VR, they experience greater reductions in stress and anxiety compared to those who practice in, a traditional setting. They also report feeling more present and engaged in the practice itself.
But, let's zoom out for a second and look at the big picture. All this research is exciting.
Yeah.
But it's still pretty new, right? Do we need more evidence before we can really say that VR is a game changer for mental health?
Oh, absolutely. We definitely need, larger, longer-term studies to confirm these initial findings and really understand the long-term effectiveness and potential risks of these interventions. And we also can't ignore the issues of accessibility and affordability, right? VR technology is still, quite expensive. It's not accessible to a lot of people. If we want VR to have a real impact on mental health care, we have to figure out how to make it more inclusive.
That's such a critical point. It's great to talk about the potential of VR,
Good.
but it needs to be accessible to everyone who could benefit.
Exactly. And it's important to remember that, VR is just a tool. It's not a magic bullet.
Mhm.
And it's not meant to replace, human connection
Okay.
or the therapeutic relationship.
Right. It's about expanding the therapist's toolkit, not replacing the therapist. But I am curious, did any of the studies look at how people react to VR differently? I imagine some people might feel, uncomfortable
Yeah.
or anxious in a virtual environment.
Yeah, you're right. It's not a one-size-fits-all solution. One study actually emphasized the importance of, considering individual differences. They found that some people, they find VR incredibly immersive and engaging, while others might find it unsettling or even, anxiety-provoking.
So therapists would need to be really careful about how they,
Yeah.
integrate VR into treatment.
Absolutely. They need to carefully assess each client's, needs and preferences and any potential vulnerabilities before even introducing VR. It's also crucial to create a safe space where clients feel comfortable sharing their experiences and giving feedback.
That makes sense. We need to be mindful of, the potential for both positive and negative reactions.
Yeah.
And make sure people feel supported throughout the process.
Exactly. And, as we're talking about all the ways VR can be used to treat existing mental health conditions, there's also a growing interest in using it for prevention.
Prevention. What do you mean by that?
Well, there's this whole field of research called positive psychology, which focuses on cultivating positive emotions,
Okay.
enhancing well-being, and building resilience, even in people who aren't, currently struggling.
So instead of waiting for problems to arise,
Mhm.
we could use VR to proactively strengthen mental health
Yeah,
and give people the tools they need to thrive.
precisely. And there's already some promising research in this area. One study found that a VR program designed to foster gratitude and appreciation led to significant increases in happiness and life satisfaction in the participants.
That's fascinating. So VR could be like a training ground for developing positive mental habits and emotional resilience.
It's a really intriguing possibility. It makes you wonder if VR could help us rewire our brains for greater happiness and well-being. Could it be a tool for personal growth and transformation, even beyond, just mental health?
That's definitely food for thought. But as with any new technology, right, we need to balance our enthusiasm with a healthy dose of caution. We need more research to understand the long-term effects of VR on the brain and its potential impact on our emotional and social lives.
Absolutely. And as we continue exploring the possibilities of VR, we need to keep, ethical considerations, data privacy, and responsible implementation at the forefront. We want to make sure this technology is used in a way that benefits, both individuals and society as a whole.
Well said. So as we wrap up this first part of our deep dive, what are some of the other areas of research that really stood out to you?
One thing that really struck me going through all this research is just how many different types of therapy are being explored with VR. It's not just about trying to recreate traditional therapy in a virtual space. It's about really using the unique aspects of VR to create entirely new experiences.
Okay, I like where this is going. Tell me more about these new experiences.
Well, there's this whole area of research that focuses on something called embodied cognition. It's the idea that our physical experiences can actually directly influence our thoughts and emotions. And researchers are finding ways to harness that mind-body connection in VR.
So you're saying that what we do with our bodies in the virtual world
Yeah.
can impact how we feel mentally.
Exactly. So there's one study where they used VR to help people with depression, practice positive body language. They had them, do these virtual exercises. That encouraged them to stand tall, smile, make eye contact, all the things that convey confidence and openness.
So it's almost like tricking the brain into feeling happier just by changing your posture.
Yeah, kind of like that. And the amazing thing is it seemed to actually work. The participants reported feeling a noticeable improvement in their mood and a decrease in those depressive symptoms after doing these exercises in VR.
That's pretty amazing. It makes you wonder, what other possibilities are out there? Could you use this to help people develop self-compassion or improve empathy and understanding in relationships?
Those are great questions. And actually, researchers are exploring those very things. I'm particularly interested in the potential for VR when it comes to social skills training. Imagine being able to practice navigating those really tricky social situations but in a safe, controlled virtual environment.
Yeah, that could be a game changer,
Yeah.
especially for people with social anxiety
Mm-hmm.
or anyone who just, struggles with those types of interactions.
Right. You could rehearse conversations, experiment with different ways of communicating, and build your confidence without the fear of messing up in real life. And because it's all virtual, you can just keep repeating those scenarios until you feel ready for the real world.
Like having a virtual social skills coach. Speaking of coaching, another area that seems right for VR is mindfulness. I've seen a ton of VR apps and programs popping up that are designed to guide you through, meditations, relaxation exercises, often incorporating immersive nature scenes and soothing sounds.
Yeah, for sure. And it's not just about offering a temporary escape. VR could actually make mindfulness practices more effective. Remember, we talked about the power of immersion. Well, being fully present in a tranquil virtual environment might help people quiet their minds and focus on the moment.
So VR gives mindfulness a boost.
Yeah, possibly. There's some promising research out there that suggests people who practice mindfulness meditation in VR experience greater reductions in stress and anxiety compared to those who practice in, a traditional setting. And they say they feel more present and engaged in the practice itself.
That's really interesting. But let's take a step back for a second. All of this is super exciting. But this research is all still pretty new, right? Do we need more evidence before we could definitively say VR is a game changer for mental health?
Oh, absolutely. We definitely need more larger, longer-term studies to really confirm these findings and get a better understanding of the long-term effectiveness and any potential risks. And we also can't ignore the issues of, accessibility and affordability. VR is still pretty expensive, and a lot of people just don't have access to it. If we want VR to really make a difference in mental health care, we have to figure out how to make it more inclusive.
That's a really important point. It's great to talk about the potential.
Yeah.
But it needs to be available to everyone.
Exactly. And it's also super important to remember that VR is just a tool. It's not like a magic bullet, and it shouldn't replace human connection or the therapeutic relationship.
Right. It's about giving therapists more tools, not replacing them. Did any of the studies look at how different people react to VR? I imagine some people might feel uncomfortable or anxious even being in that kind of virtual environment.
Yeah, you're right. VR is definitely not one size fits all. One study I came across really highlighted the importance of considering those individual differences. They found that some people just love VR. They find it really immersive and engaging. But for others, it can be unsettling or even anxiety-provoking.
So therapists would need to be really thoughtful about how they use it.
For sure. It's crucial to carefully assess each client's needs and preferences and be aware of any potential vulnerabilities before introducing VR. And then just as important is creating a safe space for clients where they feel comfortable sharing their experiences and giving feedback.
That makes a lot of sense. We need to be mindful of both the positive and negative reactions and make sure that everyone feels supported.
Exactly. And all this talk about VR treating mental health conditions, there's also a growing interest in using VR for prevention.
Prevention? What do you mean?
Well, there's this whole field of research called positive psychology, which focuses on cultivating those positive emotions, enhancing well-being, and building resilience. And this is in people who aren't even, currently struggling.
So the idea is to use VR to proactively strengthen mental health and equip people with the tools to thrive.
Exactly. And the research in this area is already pretty promising. One study found that using a VR program designed to foster gratitude and appreciation actually led to significant increases in happiness and life satisfaction.
Wow, that's fascinating. So VR could be a way to develop positive mental habits and build emotional resilience.
Yeah, it's definitely a possibility. It makes you wonder if VR could help us rewire our brains for greater well-being and happiness. Could it be a tool for personal growth and transformation that goes way beyond just mental health?
It's definitely something to think about. But as with any new tech, I think it's important to be cautious. We need more research to really understand how VR affects the brain long term and its impact on our emotional and social lives.
I agree. As we keep exploring the possibilities of VR, we need to keep ethical considerations, data privacy, and responsible implementation front and center. We want to make sure that this technology is used to benefit, everyone.
Well said. So to wrap up this part of our deep dive, what are some of the other areas of research that you found especially interesting?
One thing that's really blown me away, going through all this research, is how VR isn't just changing how we, treat these conditions. It's
Yeah.
changing how we understand, like, the whole human experience. We're using VR to explore things like consciousness, perception, well-being. Really, really profound stuff.
It's like VR is giving us this new lens to look at the human mind. Speaking of new perspectives, there was this one study that really caught my eye. They took this like totally unique approach. They used VR to create what they called a virtual reality embodiment experience, where people could actually step into someone else's body.
Oh, yeah, I remember that one. It sounded like straight out of science fiction. But the implications for empathy and understanding are, like, huge. Imagine being able to see the world through someone else's eyes, you know? Feel what they feel. Experience their perspective firsthand.
That is powerful. Do you think this could help like break down barriers and prejudices, or maybe help people be more compassionate towards each other?
That's what the researchers are hoping for, and their early findings suggest it might actually work. The people in the study, they reported feeling a big increase in empathy and a deeper understanding of the person they, embodied in VR.
That's incredible. It makes you think, like, what if we could use this to help people overcome implicit biases or foster, like, understanding between different cultures? Could it even help with, like, healing and reconciliation in conflict zones?
It's all really exciting to think about. But of course, like with any powerful tool, we got to think about the potential for misuse, right?
Yeah.
How do we make sure that these virtual embodiment experiences are used ethically? That we're not, exploiting or misrepresenting anyone's experience.
Yeah, that's a really important point. We can't just assume the tech will automatically be used for good. We have to be thoughtful about how we develop it and how we use it. But even with those challenges, it's hard not to be amazed by the potential here. Like, VR is opening up this whole new frontier in how we understand human connection and empathy.
It really is, and it goes back to what we were saying before, that VR might not just be for treating existing conditions, but for preventing them in the first place and just helping people, grow and thrive.
Right. It's about moving beyond just fixing what's broken and using this technology to help people reach their full potential. It's a pretty exciting vision for the future.
It is, and it's a future that we're all, creating right now. The research is still early, and there's so much more to learn.
Absolutely. So as we wrap up our deep dive into virtual reality and mental health, I think the biggest takeaway for me is just how much potential there is. It's clear that VR is more than just a cool new gadget. It's a tool that could really change how we think about and approach mental health and well-being.
Yeah, I totally agree. And it's a tool that we need to approach with, both enthusiasm and caution. We had to keep asking those tough questions, doing the research, and having these conversations about the ethical side of things.
For sure. And we need everyone involved in that conversation, not just the researchers and clinicians, but also policymakers, developers, and most importantly, the people who will be using this technology. The future of VR and mental health is something we're all creating together.
That's a great way to put it.
Well, that about wraps things up for this deep dive. Thanks for joining us. Until next time.